Hello, everyone. Welcome to our presentation. So for today, we're just going to give you a quick summary. So the student for our case study is in grade 3. She is extremely talkative and is able to verbally express her ideas. However, she has very low level of oral vocabulary, and when she comes to words she doesn't know, she acts it out with either facial expressions or gestures. She is seeking a tutor to help her with her language skills and to build her oral vocabulary. I'm Erin. This is Sandy, this is Max, and this is our presentation today. Now we're going to move on into discussing the problems that the student is facing and addressing it with a mini lesson.
All right, so the problem in our case study is the student's low oral vocabulary. So she's able to express herself through facial gestures or facial expressions and gestures, and her teachers are able to understand her. However, the problem is that she is not often able to understand her teachers, which is causing problems because she's falling behind in her classes now. The student is working with a tutor who has recognized that the student is easily bored and very active. So she has decided to use the language experience approach. She believes that is an effective way to build her vocabulary. And also it'll help work on reading and writing skills, and the activity will help her be engaged. So the topic of our mini lesson is speaking to communicate. Specifically, when we looked at the grade 3 curriculum, under oral communication, we found expectations 2.1, 2.3, and 2.4, which all addressed speaking to communicate. And so our goal of our mini lesson is to improve the students' oral vocabulary skills using the language experience approach.
Okay, thanks, Sandy. So the next question is, what is the language experience approach? And it's a strategy that relies on a student's personal experience as the narrative or a shared experience as the narrative. So there's a couple different ways you could do it. One example is if the class was to go on a field trip together, you could have the narrative be that field trip. Another is if the class had done like a science experiment, right? They could do a retelling of that science experiment. Another is just a personal experience. So that's actually what we're going to do for our student who we've called Suzanne. She didn't have a name in the case study. So for Suzanne, she's going to recount a personal experience to us. So broadly speaking, that's what the language experience approach is. But to explain it more in depth, there's usually about 4 to 5, maybe even 6 steps, depending on how you actually want to use this approach. So basically, what happens is in this scenario, so for our mini lesson, I will be the teacher, and Sandy will be our co-teacher, and Erin will be our co-teacher. So everyone's going to have a different role for this. So step 1 for the language experience approach is basically the teacher, who's me, would ask Suzanne to recount a personal experience. So in our hypothetical mini lesson, it would be, Suzanne, tell me about your summer vacation. What was your favorite activity to do in the summer? So basically something along the lines to kind of get her to retell a day from that summer break time and kind of create a narrative of it and have her retell it to me. So she's going to tell me the story of this summer day. That's step 1. Step 2 is while this is happening, our co-teacher, Sandy. And Sandy, could you tell everyone what you're going to do in step 2?
Yes, so as the student is talking, so sharing her story with us, the co-teacher will be scribing the story. So I'll be writing down what Suzanne is saying.
Thank you. So Sandy's going to be writing down what she's saying in the story and just focusing on that. Now that leads us to, while this is happening, our other co-teacher, so Erin is going to be doing something else and focusing on another aspect of this, which is Erin's going to be listening and watching to see what Suzanne is doing. Which words is Suzanne acting out or gesturing with her face to show that she doesn't know those words in English? Which words is she struggling with? Which words, or is there a trend in the words that she's using that she doesn't yet know, right? So Sandy is just scribing the story and just focusing on that, whereas Erin is really trying to focus on like what's happening, what's going on, creating a collection of words that, in identifying those words that she's struggling with. So step one, I ask Suzanne to recount a story. She's talking to me. Step two, Sandy, who's our co-teacher and scribe, scribes it down. Step three, after the story is done, I then read the story, the scripted story, back to Suzanne. And I can do this a couple times, and you probably should do it a couple times to really reinforce the new words that she may see now. And we actually have a mock script. So Sandy, thank you for the mock script. So this is a Suzanne's story, okay? So these are Suzanne's words. I like to go swimming at the beach. I went with my big brother. He likes to throw the beach ball with me in the water. After we ran out of the water, we went to get ice cream. After we ate our ice cream, it started to rain, excuse me. We ran to the car and drove home. So the reason I'm acting out is because those are all the words that she would have been acting out, right? And then I would read it a couple times to reinforce the learning. So I'll read it again for you since we're doing this like it. I like to go swimming at the beach. I went with my big brother. He likes to throw the beach ball with me in the water. After we ran out of the water, we went to get ice cream. After we ate our ice cream, it started to rain. We ran to the car and we drove home. So that's step three, which is just the teacher reading the scripted experience back to the student. Step four is then Suzanne, the student, so Suzanne would read the story orally to the teacher and the co-teachers now, right? Trying to make use of hopefully the new words she's learned and practice her speaking skills. And then that brings us to step five in our mini lesson, which is, Erin, do you want to discuss that now?
Yeah, absolutely. So for step five, going over what Max was saying, I've been listening this entire time to Suzanne and taking notes in regards to the types of words she's having difficulty communicating in English. Based on my recognition, she's having trouble with action words or verbs. So I have created a word wall along with small pictures to go with the actions she was doing. So for the first word, swimming, and you have the little character and he's swimming. He's swimming. The second one is big. So I have a little person with an up and down arrow. So he is big. The third is throw. So I have a little character with a ball throwing it. So he's throwing the ball and the other person is catching the ball. Then we have ran. And I have a little character whose legs are up and he ran to the car. So ran. Ate. I have a little person who is eating an apple. Then we have rain with a little rain cloud and little raindrops, and it's raining. Lastly, we have drove, and we have a little person whose hands are on a steering wheel and they drove.
Perfect. Good job, Erin.
Thank you.
Okay. So that's the language experience approach, and that's sort of how we would do a little mini lesson with Suzanne specifically. But there's one extra part too, which is how are we actually going to assess her during all this? And Erin, do you want to talk about that now?
Yeah, absolutely. All right, I'm going to share my screen. And after this is done, I will unshare my screen and we'll go back to what we originally had. But as for now, all right. Can everyone see what I have?
Yep.
Excellent. All right, so we made an assessment rubric, and based off this rubric, we looked at the CLB and CLC overview of competencies for language. So this rubric references the outline and the criteria for the overview of CLB and NCLC competency levels. But more specifically, we looked at the stage 1 basic language ability, And that rubric, because our scenario has us working with a grade 3 student who has a low oral vocabulary, so we're not looking at someone who's been developing their skills. We're looking at someone who has typically at the basics. So our rubric, we looked at 3 specific things. We looked at listening, speaking, and reading. We aren't assessing writing in this mini lesson. And in regards to levels, we did 4 levels. So initial is level 1, developing is level 2, adequate is level 3, and fluent is level 4. For listening, we have how students are interpreting oral communication in regards to following instructions and asking questions. So the student demonstrates that they understand simple information, but they still require a lot of clarity from the teacher. For developing, the student demonstrates they understand simple information and can answer and follow some instructions. However, they still need some clarity. At the adequate level, student demonstrates they understand simple information, can answer the questions and follow instruction with limited clarity that's needed. And fluent has the student understanding both simple and detailed information in the form of question and instructions with little to no clarity. Again, for speaking, students are communicating orally with the teacher, and they're responding to the teacher's questions. So a student who's at the initial stage would only be able to communicate a limited amount of words, and they might be able to not finish their story and have to rely on non-verbal forms of communication to get it through to us. If they're at the developing stage, they would still use nonverbal communication. However, they'd be using more of a variety of simple words, but would again still need assistance. If they were at an adequate level, they can clearly communicate their story using a variety of simple words and might attempt at using more complex words, but nonverbal forms of communication can still be used. And at the fluent stage, they're using a variety of simple words and complex words. They also can understand the tense and different types of words they are using. But again, nonverbal forms of communication can be used just to express themselves more clearly. As for reading, students can read English written forms of communication, and they also understand the meaning behind these words in writing. So the student can read a few words described in their life experience, but they have limited understanding behind the meaning of these words, and they might have like long periods of silence or ask for more assistance from the teacher. If they're developing, they can read some of the words and they have a limited understanding of the meaning behind a few of the words, but will need clarity. If they're at the adequate level, they can read most of the words and they can understand most of the words as well. If they are at the fluent level, they can read the majority of the words and understand the majority meaning, as well as the tense behind the words being used in their story. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to just turn my screen back on so you can see my face. There we go. And just going back to our part 5, so we're just going to discuss our strategies and methods in regards to why we use them. So one method that we used was repeat for clarity. Both myself, Max, and Sandy all repeated multiple words when we were discussing with you, just because when you're working with ELL students, you might need to repeat instructions, and that just allows them for more time to process the information and read your verbal and nonverbal communication. We also had visual aids in the forms of our word wall with our drawings. It was demonstrating the students' actions, but it was another visual tool that they could see. And I'm going to give it over to Max, who will explain some other strategies.
Yeah, good job, Erin. So another one too is just using clear and concise communication, right? Obviously, you're teaching Suzanne, who's in ELL, excuse me, and you need to be able to speak properly and clearly. She has to learn the proper way to pronounce the words, the proper phonetic way to pronounce them, right? You don't want to teach her any bad habits with your own improper speech patterns. And Sandy, do you have a couple more?
Yes. So another strategy that we used was called the total physical response strategy, which involves acting out the words. So when we as teachers act out the words, it allows a student to develop a deeper understanding of the word. And then, of course, the language experience approach that we use for our mini lesson, which involves building the student's oral vocabulary.
Yeah, perfect. And then the next part we want to talk about is just a little bit of extension activities that you could do with this or the lesson itself. There's a few different things you can do. The LEA approach is actually, it's very simple, but there's a lot of different ways you can go with it. Erin, you want to talk about a couple of them for us?
Absolutely. As Max was saying, for the LEA approach, you can differentiate in regards to creating word work activities for spelling. You also can have Suzanne, for instance, write her story about her summer vacation, and she can also create pictures to go with her story. You could have Suzanne work with a partner, and both can share their stories and ask each other questions. You could create a word wall using past, present, and future tense of adverbs, verbs, and adjectives. As you can see with the example we gave, a lot of those verbs were in different tenses, so there's different ways to say the word. And then we also could have flashcards to practice making short sentences using different variations of the words from what we have learned through word wall practice. So
Perfect.
overall, this is just our understanding of the topic when it comes to the language experience approach. We appreciate you watching. Excellent job, Sandy, Max, and myself. Have a great day.
Bye, everybody.